Do you think that loving a dog is like planting a seed of sadness? Because from the very first day we love them, we know one day we will have to say goodbye. A Navy SEAL survived countless moments between life and death, yet feared one thing above all else. In a quiet orphanage, a child asked him a simple question that made his heart pause. That question carried him back to a frozen forest, where between life and death, a dog chose to stay. This is a story about loyalty, faith, and the pain of loving someone who cannot stay forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Sunlight in Pine Glass didn't blaze the way it did in warmer places. It arrived politely, like a guest wiping its boots at the door-thin gold, slipping over snowdrifts, turning the town's rooftops into quiet mirrors. The air had that northern bite that made every breath feel earned, and yet the day looked bright enough to fool a person into believing winter had softened. Ronan Vale didn't fall for that kind of lie. He parked his weathered truck beside the low brick building with a hand-painted sign that read, St. Ilara Home. The orphanage sat tucked between tall pines and a fenced yard where snow had been stomped into uneven trails, proof that children, like spring, insisted on returning. Ronan stepped out into the cold. He stood a moment with his shoulders squared, as if listening for a command that would never come. At 6 feet, about 1 meter 83, he moved with the quiet economy of someone who had once been trained to make space around danger. His build was lean and compact, muscle kept under control rather than displayed. The clean-shaven line of his jaw showed a square discipline that years hadn't erased, and his cheekbones caught the winter light like the edges of a blade. His hair was dark brown, cut in a military style that ran slightly longer than regulation, an accidental confession that he lived between worlds now, neither fully soldier nor fully civilian. Wind and cold had roughened his skin into a pale, weathered tone, and his gray-blue eyes were the kind that didn't stare so much as measure. Not judgmental, just awake. At his heel, a German shepherd climbed out with the deliberate grace of a professional. Briggs was 5 years old, black and tan, broad-chested, without being bulky. His coat looked like it had been painted by someone who knew exactly where to place shadow and warmth-dark saddle across his back. Amber gold on his legs and cheeks. His ears were upright, attentive, and his eyes, deep brown, with a honeyed sheen, missed nothing. If Ronan was a locked door, Briggs was the key ring. Patient, organized, and suspicious of strangers who smiled too easily. Ronan wore the same thing he wore most days, as if uniforms were safer than choices. A worn olive/gray tactical combat shirt, softened by age and weather, faintly frayed at the cuffs and shoulders. His combat pants, earthy brown-green, had scuffed knees and cargo pockets that sagged slightly with use. His old military boots carried scratches like a map of everywhere he had been. On his wrist, an old military watch ticked on, stubborn as a heartbeat. No medals, no flag pins, no speeches. Just a man and his dog, arriving like they weren't sure they belonged in a place built for laughter. Inside, warmth rushed them, like an embrace they hadn't asked for. The hallway smelled of lemon cleaner, cocoa, and damp wool drying on radiators. Somewhere deeper in the building, children's voices rose and fell like a flock of sparrows. At the front office, a woman looked up from a clipboard and smiled the kind of smile that had survived too many budgets and too many goodbyes. Moira O'Hara was in her early 50s, medium height, sturdy in a way that suggested she carried more than boxes. She carried people. Her hair, dark with silver threads, was twisted into a practical knot. Her face was lined not with bitterness, but with the kind of fatigue that came from staying. Her eyes were sharp, bright, and kind in the way sharp tools could be kind. Useful, honest, not ornamental. "Mr. Vale," she said, extending a hand. "You came." Ronan shook it carefully, as if afraid of breaking something invisible. "I said I would." Moira glanced down at Briggs. "And you brought your assistant." Briggs sat without being told, tail resting on the floor like a punctuation mark. His gaze lifted to Moira with polite suspicion, an expression that said, "I accept your existence, but I'm monitoring it." Moira laughed under her breath. "Oh, he's already judging my paperwork." "Good. Someone should." Ronan's mouth twitched at the corner. It wasn't quite a smile, more like the memory of one. Moira led them toward the multi-purpose room, where a semicircle of children waited on folding chairs. They ranged from toddlers with sticky fingers to older kids who tried hard not to look like they needed anyone. Most of them wore mismatched winter sweaters and socks that didn't match because, as Moira put it, matching is a luxury item. As Ronan stepped into the room, the chatter softened. Not out of fear exactly, but out of curiosity. Children had an instinct for reading silence, and Ronan carried his like a coat. Briggs changed the mood immediately. He padded forward, sniffed the air, and then without warning, dropped into a perfect downstay with the seriousness of a royal guard. The children stared. One boy whispered, "Is he a police dog?" Another whispered back, "No, he's like a night dog." Ronan cleared his throat. "He's just Briggs." Briggs lifted his head, as if to say, "Just?" A few children giggled. The room's tension loosened by a thread. Moira took the back row, folding her arms, watching with the careful hope of someone who had seen too many well-meaning adults vanish after one visit. She had asked Ronan here because the children needed stories that didn't talk down to them. They needed a truth that could fit in small hands. Ronan stood at the front, hands clasped behind his back, posture still military. He didn't love being looked at. In his former life, attention meant orders, evaluation, consequences. It meant someone somewhere taking notes. But Briggs sat beside him, steady, and that steadiness was contagious. Ronan began simply. He didn't mention war. He didn't mention medals. He didn't mention the kind of nights that came with loud noises and too much memory. "I'm here," he said, "because Ms. O'Hara asked me to talk about loyalty." A girl in the front wrinkled her nose. "Like loyalty points?" The children burst into laughter. Even Moira's shoulders shook. Ronan paused. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in calculation. Then he nodded once, deadpan. "Yes," he said, "exactly like loyalty points, except you can't redeem a dog for a toaster." The laughter doubled. Briggs tilted his head, as if confused why humans found this so amusing. Ronan let the moment land. Humor was a bridge he rarely crossed, but the dog made it easier. Briggs acted like Ronan's better, softer translator. When the room quieted, Ronan crouched to be closer to their level. His voice lowered. "Loyalty," he said, isn't just staying when things are easy. Anyone can do that. Loyalty is staying when you're scared, when you're tired, when you don't know what happens next. He reached down, resting his hand briefly on Briggs's head. The dog leaned into it, not needy, just present. A small boy raised his hand. Why does he listen to you? Ronan glanced at Briggs. He doesn't listen to me. Not always. Briggs' ears flagged, as if offended. Ronan continued, a touch dry. He listens because we trust each other. I feed him, I train him, I keep him safe when I can, and he... Ronan's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. He does the same for me. The children leaned forward. Ronan explained simple things. How dogs read body language. How they knew when a person was sad even if they smiled. How a dog could learn the sound of one person's footsteps and recognize them in a crowd. He demonstrated with Briggs. A hand signal, a quiet word, and the dog responded with crisp, controlled motions. Sit, down, stay, come. It looked like magic to the children, but to Ronan it was repetition and patience and trust earned in small, boring moments. The kind of trust that didn't announce itself with fireworks. As he spoke, he felt the room change. Not louder, not more excited, just warmer. Children began to inch closer. One girl scooted her chair forward, one nervous scrape at a time. Two brothers whispered arguments about whether Briggs's ears were radar or satellite dishes. Ronan found himself watching their faces, noting the careful way they balanced hope with caution. He knew that look. He had worn it himself once, long before he wore a uniform. Then something strange happened. Briggs's head snapped toward the window. The dog's body stiffened, a fine tremor of alertness passing through him. His ears pricked so sharply, it was as if he'd heard a voice no one else could. Ronan's gaze followed instinctively, and for a heartbeat he felt his own chest tighten, an old reflex crawling up his spine. Outside, the yard lay quiet. Snow drifted along the fence. A raven lifted from a branch and sailed away, black against the sky. Nothing else. Briggs didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stared, listening with the patience of an animal who understood that danger didn't always roar, it sometimes whispered. Ronan's mouth went dry. For a moment, he wasn't in the orphanage. He was somewhere colder, darker, where the trees were taller and the silence had teeth. He blinked once, hard, as if to shake frost off memory. Moira noticed. Her eyes narrowed from the back row, reading Ronan's posture the way she read children's moods. She didn't interrupt. She just gave him a look that said, "You're here now. Stay here." Ronan exhaled slowly, guiding himself back. He lowered his hand to Briggs's collar, a simple, grounding touch. The dog's attention returned, and his body relaxed. Briggs looked up at him as if to ask, "You good?" Ronan nodded almost imperceptibly. "Sometimes," Ronan said to the room, forcing his voice steady. "A dog notices things before we do." A boy whispered, awed, like a guardian. Ronan's eyes flicked to Briggs again. "Yeah," he said, "like that." The children started asking questions. What did Briggs eat? How much did he weigh? Did he have a favorite toy? Did he ever get scared? Ronan answered carefully, giving what he could without spilling the parts of himself he still kept locked. When one child asked, "Do dogs get lonely?" Ronan found himself pausing longer than expected. Briggs pressed his shoulder lightly against Ronan's leg, the smallest nudge, a reminder. Ronan cleared his throat. Dogs get lonely, he said. People do too. A hush settled again, softer than before, like snowfall. On the front row sat a girl with dark curls and two old eyes. She had been quiet the entire time, hands folded in her lap, as if she was holding herself together. Her name tag, Moira's idea, read Marlowe. Marlowe watched Ronan the way someone watched a door they weren't sure would open. She looked at Briggs as if she wanted to believe in him, but didn't dare. Ronan met her gaze for a moment and felt something stir, something like recognition, like a reflection of his own younger self. Marlowe's fingers tightened around the hem of her sweater. She swallowed. Then, slowly, she raised her hand. Ronan nodded to her, inviting her voice into the room. And the whole orphanage seemed to hold its breath. Silence has weight. In the multi-purpose room of St. Ilara home, it settled like fresh snow, soft, total, impossible to ignore. Ronan Vale felt it before he heard it. The quiet pressed against his chest, and for a breath, he wondered if anyone else could feel how heavy it was. Across the semicircle of folding chairs, the children had stilled. No swinging feet, no whispers. Even the radiators clicking seemed to hesitate, as if the building itself were listening. Marlowe's hand remained raised. She was small for 9, all elbows and careful posture, her dark curls pulled back with a tired elastic that had lost its stretch. Her skin was pale in the winter light, freckled faintly across the bridge of her nose. But it was her eyes that held the room brown, steady, older than they should have been. Eyes that had learned to wait before hoping. Ronan nodded to her. Yes, he said. Marlowe took a breath. It trembled once and steadied, as if she'd practiced that too. Do dogs leave? She asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. I mean, do they ever choose to leave us? The question did not sound rehearsed. It sounded like something that had lived inside her for a long time, knocking. Ronan didn't answer. He didn't look at the ceiling or the floor. He looked down at Briggs. The German shepherd sat close at his side, black and tan coat catching the sunlight in clean lines. At 5 years old, Briggs had the solid confidence of a working dog who understood routines and trusted them. His ears were relaxed, angled slightly outward, a sign of comfort. His eyes lifted to Ronan's face, calm, attentive, waiting. Briggs didn't fidget. He didn't whine. He simply stayed. Ronan swallowed. Across the room, Moira O'Hara watched him with a careful stillness. She had shifted in her chair, one ankle hooked behind the other, hands folded loosely in her lap. Her face, lined by years of responsibility and kindness rationed carefully, showed no impatience. She knew better than to rush a man standing at the edge of something private. Ronan felt the pull of memory like a tide. He resisted it at first. He had promised himself he wouldn't bring the past into this room. Not like that. These children had enough ghosts. But the question wouldn't let go. Sometimes, Ronan said slowly, choosing each word as if it might break, people leave. Marlowe nodded. It wasn't agreement. It was recognition. Ronan continued, voice steady but low. Sometimes they leave because they're scared. Sometimes because they're hurt. Sometimes because they think leaving will make things easier. A boy near the back frowned. Does that mean dogs get scared too? Ronan almost smiled. Yeah, he said. Dogs get scared. Briggs's tail made a single, soft sweep against the floor. Not anxious, not happy, just present. Ronan shifted his weight, boots whispering against the linoleum. He crouched again so he was level with the children, with Marlowe. His knees protested faintly, a reminder of years spent kneeling on surfaces that didn't forgive, but he ignored it. But dogs, he said, don't decide things the same way people do. Marlowe's gaze didn't waver. How do they decide? She asked. Ronan opened his mouth to answer and stopped, because the truth was, he didn't know how to explain it without opening a door he kept locked. Briggs solved it for him. The dog leaned forward and pressed his shoulder gently against Ronan's thigh. It wasn't a demand for attention. It was a grounding touch, firm and familiar, a reminder of weight and warmth and here. Ronan closed his eyes for half a second. Then he spoke. Dogs decide with their whole bodies, he said, with memory, with smell, with feeling. They decide with the part of them that remembers who fed them when they were hungry, who stayed when it was cold, who came back. A murmur passed through the room, soft as breath. Marlowe's hands tightened in her lap. But what if the person they love goes away first? The question landed hard. Ronan felt it strike somewhere under his ribs, where the armor ended. He exhaled slowly. That, he said, is when dogs stay the longest. The children leaned in. Ronan didn't realize he was telling a story until he was already inside it. He kept his voice careful, his details spare. He didn't mention blood. He didn't mention teeth. He didn't mention the night that still woke him sometimes with his heart racing. He spoke instead of cold, of snow, of being tired enough to miss signs that should have mattered. Once, he said, I was somewhere very far from here, somewhere cold and dark and quiet in a way that makes you listen too hard. Briggs's ears tipped forward slightly, not alert, but attentive, as if he recognized the cadence. I made a mistake, Ronan continued. I didn't listen the first time I should have. And when things went wrong, they went wrong fast. The children were silent now, not with fear, but with focus. There was a moment, Ronan said, when I fell, and I couldn't get up fast enough. He paused, and my dog stepped in front of me. Marlowe's breath caught, just a sound, just enough. Ronan didn't describe the impact. He didn't describe the pain. He described the look. He looked back at me, Ronan said, voice roughening despite his effort. And he didn't look scared. He looked sure. Briggs lifted his head a fraction higher, as if hearing his name without hearing it. He stayed, Ronan said, even when it hurt, even when it would have been easier to run. Ronan felt the room sway, not physically, but emotionally, like a boat adjusting to a shift in current. He steadied himself with a hand on Briggs's neck, fingers sinking into warm fur. The dog's heartbeat was steady under his palm. Reliable. That was when it happened. Briggs's head turned slowly this time, deliberately toward Marlowe. His gaze settled on her, not sharp or suspicious, but soft, curious. He studied her face with the focus he usually reserved for Ronan, as if something in her scent or posture had reached him. Marlowe froze. Briggs stood and took 2 quiet steps forward. He stopped just short of her knees and sat, straight-backed, calm. He did not touch her. He waited. The room held its breath, Moira's hand rose halfway, instinctively ready to intervene, but she stopped when she saw Briggs's posture. This wasn't intrusion. This was invitation. Marlowe stared at the dog. Her lower lip trembled. Ronan said nothing. Briggs lowered his head slightly. A deferential angle. A choice. Marlowe lifted her hand, slow and unsure, and rested it on the top of Briggs's head. The dog didn't flinch. He leaned into the touch, just enough for her to feel the warmth. Marlowe's shoulders collapsed inward, as if she'd been holding them up for years. Ronan felt something in his chest loosen. Not heal, loosen. After a moment, Briggs stood and returned to Ronan's side, settling with a quiet huff. The rehook, if there was one, passed like a ripple through the room, leaving something changed behind it. Ronan straightened, heart steadying. Marlowe looked up at him again. "So," she said softly, "do dogs ever leave?" Ronan met her eyes. "No," he said, "not the way people do." "But dogs die," a boy said, matter of fact, from the second row. Ronan nodded. He respected honesty. "Yes," he said, "they do." Marlowe's hand clenched again. "Then isn't that the same thing?" Ronan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm, like someone placing a hand on a shoulder and meaning it. "No," he said, "it's not." He moved closer, crouching again, so there was no distance between his answer and her fear. "When a dog leaves, because it has to," Ronan said, "it doesn't leave because it stops loving you. It leaves because it has given you everything it had, every warm day, every cold night, every moment it chose to stay." He glanced down at Briggs. "Loving a dog," he continued, "means you start planting a small seed of sadness the day you bring them home. Because one day, you'll miss them." Marlowe's eyes shone. "But," Ronan said, softer now, "you also plant a forest of days where you weren't alone. Days where someone stayed when they didn't have to." He reached out, palm open. Briggs pressed his head into Ronan's hand, eyes closing briefly. Marlowe watched that simple motion as if it were a promise being kept. Ronan looked back at her and finished, voice steady. "So no," he said, "dogs don't leave us. Not really. They stay as long as they can, and when they can't, they leave all the love behind." The room exhaled. Marlowe nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if setting something fragile down in a safer place. Briggs remained at Ronan's side, warm and breathing, and here. And for a while, that was enough. Memory did not return all at once. It came the way winter storms did in the north, quiet at first, almost polite, a tightening in the chest, a smell that did not belong to the present. Cold that had nothing to do with the room Ronan was standing in. He was still in St. Alara home. He could feel the linoleum beneath his boots, the low hum of the radiator, the careful silence of children holding on to his words. And yet, the forest rose around him. Snow fell in slow, relentless sheets, heavy enough to soften sound but not danger. Pines stretched upward like dark sentinels, their branches burdened with ice. The moon was a pale smear behind clouds, giving just enough light to betray movement and not enough to explain it. Ronan was younger then, not by much, but enough to feel the difference in his body. His shoulders were less burdened by memory. His mind still believed that discipline alone could keep chaos at bay. At his side moved Briggs. He was younger too, just over 3 at the time, leaner, faster. His black and tan coat was thicker then, untouched by scar or age. His muscles coiled beneath his fur like restrained wire. His eyes were the same, though. Always the same. Focused. Reading the world as if it spoke a language Ronan could only half understand. They moved together through the forest with the kind of coordination that did not need commands. Ronan's steps slowed. Briggs slowed. Ronan stopped. Briggs froze. Ears forward, tail low. That night, the mission had already gone long. Too long. They were supposed to pass through, gather information, leave before dawn. Simple plans were the ones that broke most easily. The men with Ronan were good experienced, capable. Fatigue made fools of everyone eventually. Cold worsened it. Hunger shortened tempers. Silence became a thing you filled with noise just to remind yourself you were still human. They made camp in a shallow clearing, sheltered from the worst of the wind. A small fire burned low, more suggestion than flame. No one spoke above a murmur. Briggs did not lie down. He paced the perimeter once, twice. His nose lifted, testing the air. His ears rotated slowly, searching. Ronan noticed. He always did. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, more out of habit than expectation. Briggs stopped and stared into the darkness beyond the firelight. His body was tense, but not panicked, alert. Listening. Ronan felt the prickle then, the familiar tightening at the base of his skull, the sense that something was misaligned. One of the men, Gideon Rusk, noticed Briggs too. Gideon was built like a door-frame, broad shoulders, thick neck, a beard that never quite grew evenly. He had the easy confidence of someone who believed problems were meant to be confronted head-on. Humor was his shield. He joked when others went quiet, filling space where fear might otherwise settle. "Relax," Gideon muttered, glancing at the dog. Probably a rabbit freezing its ass off. Briggs did not move. Ronan opened his mouth to say something, then stopped, because a sound reached them. Not loud, not close, just enough to be real. A whimper, high, thin, desperate. It did not sound like a threat. It sounded like something lost. The men shifted. Someone cursed softly. Another leaned forward, curiosity overriding caution. Gideon stood. "I'll check it." Ronan was on his feet instantly. "No." Gideon looked back, eyebrow raised. "It's an animal." "That's why," Ronan said. The whimper came again, closer now, almost pleading. They found it near the tree line, a small shape hunched in the snow, gray fur, too small to be alone, too still. "A pup," Gideon said, crouching. "Damn thing's half frozen." Briggs stopped several feet away. His body stiffened in a way Ronan had never seen before. Not aggression, not fear. Warning. Ronan felt it then, sharp and certain. "We don't touch it." Gideon frowned. "It's dying." "We don't know what it is," Ronan said. Gideon shrugged. "Looks close enough to a dog." Briggs growled, low, controlled. A sound Ronan had only heard once before, during training. It was not a threat. It was a boundary. Ronan stepped between Gideon and the pup. "We leave it." Silence stretched. Snow fell. Fatigue won. "It's cold," Gideon said. "We leave it here. It dies." Ronan hesitated. That hesitation, he would replay it for years. They brought the pup closer to the fire. It whimpered, louder now. A sound that tugged at the oldest parts of the human brain. Briggs would not sit. He paced, restless. His ears flattened briefly, then lifted again. He stared into the forest, breath coming faster. Ronan watched him. He should have trusted him. The first sign came without drama. A shift in the wind. A scent musky, wild, unmistakable. Briggs froze, and then it happened. The forest erupted. A shape burst from the darkness, moving faster than Ronan could track. Gray fur, yellow eyes, teeth flashing in the firelight. A wolf. It did not roar. It did not circle. It charged. Ronan moved without thinking, stepping back to create space for the others. His boot slid on ice, hidden beneath fresh snow. He went down hard, the world tilting violently. The wolf redirected instantly, toward him. Briggs launched. The impact knocked the breath from Ronan's lungs, even from where he lay. Fur and muscle collided with a sound like breaking wood. Briggs clamped onto the wolf's shoulder, buying seconds. Seconds were everything. Ronan reached for his weapon, but the wolf was faster than Briggs was strong. Teeth found flesh. Briggs cried out. The sound tore through Ronan's chest like a blade. The flare went up moments later, screaming light into the sky. The wolf retreated, wounded but alive, melting back into the forest it belonged to. Silence crashed down. Briggs lay in the snow. Blood darkened his fur, steaming faintly in the cold. Ronan crawled to him, hands shaking. No, 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 no. Micah Penn, their medic, arrived seconds later. Micah was lean, sharp-featured, his face perpetually calm, even when his hands moved fast. He knelt, pressed fingers to Briggs's neck, checked his chest. Too long. Micah looked up. I can't feel a pulse. Ronan didn't hear him. He heard only the whimper that had started everything. The pup, now clearer in the light, was no dog. A wolf cub. Everything clicked into place too late. Ronan placed his hands on Briggs's chest. Stay, he whispered. His training took over. Compressions, breathing, warming, praying to a god he wasn't sure was listening. Nothing. Then, a shudder, a breath. Micah's voice cracked. Again. Do it again. Briggs coughed weakly, eyes fluttering open just enough to find Ronan. In that moment, Ronan knew. Not that Briggs had saved him, but that Briggs had chosen him. The memory loosened its grip. Ronan was back in the orphanage. Briggs sat beside him, warm and breathing, and the fear, that old, familiar fear of loss settled quietly between his ribs. The forest did not let them leave quietly. Even after the flare burned itself out and the last echo of the wolf vanished into the dark, the trees seemed to lean closer, listening. Snow continued to fall, soft and unrelenting, covering tracks as if the night were ashamed of what it had revealed. Ronan stayed on his knees beside Briggs. The dog's breathing was shallow, but real. Each rise of his chest a fragile negotiation with the cold. His black and tan fur was matted where blood had soaked in, darker now, heavier. Steam lifted faintly from his body, vanishing almost as soon as it appeared. Ronan's hands never left him. Up close, Briggs looked smaller than he ever had. Not weaker, just mortal. His ears twitched once, then again, reacting to sounds Ronan couldn't hear. His eyes were half-lidded, unfocused. But when Ronan leaned closer, they shifted, searching. Hey, Ronan murmured, his voice rough, barely sound. I'm here. The words felt useless, too small for what they carried. Micah Penn crouched on the opposite side, his movements precise despite the cold. He was a man who looked built from angle-sharp nose, narrow jaw, cheekbones pulled tight beneath wind-bitten skin. His hair, dark and cropped close, was dusted with snow that melted slowly against his scalp. Micah's calm had always been earned the hard way. Years of triage had taught him that panic was contagious and lethal. He wrapped an emergency thermal blanket around Briggs, careful not to disturb the injured area. His fingers checked the dog's gums, then his pulse again, slower this time, more deliberate. "It's weak," Micah said, "but it's there." Ronan nodded, though his eyes never left Briggs's face. Gideon stood a few steps back, shoulders hunched, his usual swagger stripped away. The big man looked suddenly older, his beard stiff with frost, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. He avoided looking at the wolf cub, now quiet and huddled near a tree, and avoided looking at Briggs even more. "Ronan," Gideon said finally, his voice hoarse. Ronan didn't look up. "Not now," he said. Gideon swallowed whatever he'd planned to say and stepped back into silence. They moved out before dawn, slow and careful. Ronan carried Briggs against his chest, adjusting his grip every few steps to keep pressure off the wound. The weight was familiar. He'd carried wounded men like this before, but this was different. Men complained. Men cursed. Men argued with death. Briggs did none of that. He simply stayed quiet, trusting Ronan to do the rest. That trust burned. By the time the evacuation point came into view, Ronan's arms were shaking, not from fatigue, but from the effort of keeping himself together. He had learned long ago how to function under fire. He had never learned how to function under the possibility of losing the one being who had never questioned him. The medics took Briggs gently, their hands practiced, their voices calm. Ronan stood back only when he was told to, his fingers curling into fists at his sides as if letting go required conscious permission. One of the medics, a woman with close-cropped blonde hair and pale skin reddened by the cold, gave him a brief nod. "He's tough," she said. "We'll do what we can." Ronan watched them load Briggs into the vehicle. He didn't thank her. Gratitude felt premature, dangerous. The doors closed. The sound echoed too loudly. That was when the shaking started. It wasn't dramatic, no collapse, no shouting, just a subtle tremor in Ronan's hands, then his shoulders, like a structure finally admitting strain. Micah noticed. He always did. "You did everything right," Micah said quietly, standing beside him. Ronan stared at the snow where Briggs's blood had already begun to disappear. "No," he said, "I didn't." Micah didn't argue. That was what made him a good medic and a better friend. The memory blurred there, edges softening, as if Ronan's mind refused to linger too long on what came after. He did not remember the debrief clearly. He remembered the sound of fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, the weight of silence in rooms where answers were expected and none were acceptable. He remembered sitting alone hours later, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. He remembered the fear, not fear of dying, fear of waking up in a world where Briggs was not waiting. That fear stayed. It followed him out of the forest, out of the service, into the quiet civilian life he built piece by piece. It was there, in the way he checked doors twice at night, in the way sudden noises tightened his chest before his mind could intervene. And it was there, too, in the way he watched Briggs sleep. Even years later, back in the present, Ronan stood in the multipurpose room of St. Alara home, his breath steady, his face composed. No one in the room knew what his hands remembered. Briggs sat beside him now, older, broader through the chest, his movements a touch slower. A faint scar traced the fur near his neck, half hidden unless you knew where to look. His eyes lifted to Ronan's face with the same quiet certainty they always had. Ronan felt the echo of that night press against his ribs. He had never told anyone the part that came after. Not Micah, not Gideon, not even himself, really. He had never said out loud that in the days following the incident, he had caught himself watching Briggs breathe, counting each rise and fall, as if the act itself might anchor the dog to the world. He had never admitted that he slept lighter after that, waking at the smallest sound Briggs made, heart racing until he confirmed the dog was still there. He had never said how the thought of losing Briggs frightened him more than any mission ever had, because missions ended. This stayed. Ronan shifted his weight slightly. Briggs adjusted with him automatically, a mere response learned over years of shared space. The children waited. They sensed something had changed, not in the room, but in him. Moira O'Hara watched from the back, her sharp eyes softening. She had seen men carry silence like this before. She recognized the posture of someone holding something precious and heavy. Ronan inhaled slowly. He did not intend to speak further. Not yet. That was when Briggs did something unexpected. The dog stood, not abruptly, not alerting. Just a smooth rise to his feet, muscles moving beneath his coat with controlled ease. He turned in a slow circle, nose lowered, sniffing the air, not the floor, not the walls, but the space itself. Ronan frowned slightly. Briggs had done this before, rarely, only in moments when Ronan's thoughts had drifted too far inward. The dog stopped in front of Ronan and pressed his forehead gently against Ronan's thigh. Not leaning, pressing. The contact was firm enough to be felt through fabric and muscle. Unmistakable. A grounding gesture. Ronan's breath caught. The room was utterly still. Briggs held the position for a heartbeat longer, then stepped back and sat, gaze lifting to Ronan's face with quiet insistence. Here, the look said. Stay here. Ronan closed his eyes. For just a moment, he allowed himself to feel it. The fear, the gratitude, the grief that had never quite found a place to rest. When he opened his eyes again, they were clear. The memory receded, not erased, but contained. He looked at the children, then at Marlowe. She was watching him closely, her expression serious, thoughtful. She had not asked another question. She was waiting for him to finish the first one. Ronan understood then that this was the hardest part of loyalty. Not the staying, not the fighting, but the knowing that staying meant one day hurting. He lowered himself into a crouch again, bringing himself level with her. Briggs remained at his side, solid, breathing, present. Ronan placed one hand on the dog's back and felt the warmth there. The memory fell silent, and Ronan was ready to speak. Ronan felt the room before he spoke. Not the walls, not the chairs, not the scuffed linoleum beneath his boots, but the space between breaths. The way children leaned forward without realizing it. The way silence, once heavy, had become careful, expectant. Briggs stood close at his side, no longer pressing, no longer correcting, simply present. His weight was familiar, reassuring, a quiet constant against Ronan's leg. The answer Ronan had been avoiding for years was no longer a thought. It was a responsibility. He looked at Marlowe. She hadn't moved since her last question. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers intertwined so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. Her dark curls framed her face unevenly, as if she had tried to tame them once and then decided some things were not meant to be controlled. Her eyes were steady, but there was a tremor beneath that steadiness, a child bracing for loss before it arrived. Ronan recognized that posture. He lowered himself into a crouch, slowly, deliberately, making sure the movement itself did not feel like a retreat. At this level, he could see the fine freckles on Marlowe's nose, the faint shadow beneath her eyes that spoke of interrupted sleep and unanswered questions. Briggs adjusted with him, settling into a sit, chest lifted, ears relaxed. He looked from Ronan to Marlowe and back again, tracking the exchange as if it were a task he had trained for all his life. Ronan rested one hand on Briggs's back. The warmth there was undeniable. "Earlier," Ronan said quietly, "you asked if dogs ever leave." Marlowe nodded once. "I didn't answer right away," he continued, "because that question deserves the truth. Not the kind that makes things sound better than they are, but the kind that lets you keep breathing afterward." A few of the younger children shifted, sensing the weight of the moment without fully understanding it. Moira O'Hara, standing near the back, now with her arms loosely crossed, watched Ronan with an expression that mixed concern and gratitude. She had learned long ago that some answers couldn't be softened without breaking them. Ronan inhaled slowly through his nose, grounding himself the way he had been trained to do in far more dangerous places. "No," he said at last. "Dogs don't leave us." Marlowe's eyes flickered, not with relief, but with caution. "Not the way people do," Ronan added gently. He glanced down at Briggs, then back at her. "When people leave," Ronan said, "it's usually because they're trying to escape something. Pain, fear, guilt. Sometimes they think leaving is the only way to survive." The words felt heavy, but honest. Dogs don't think like that. Briggs's tail moved once, slow and steady, brushing the floor. Ronan continued, his voice even, unhurried. "When a dog chooses you, it's not a small thing. It's not a promise made lightly. Dogs don't measure time the way we do. They measure presence, smell, routine. They measure the world by who stays." Marlowe's lips parted slightly, as if she were afraid to interrupt the shape of the words. "There was a night," Ronan said, "when my dog had every reason to run." He did not describe the forest. He did not describe the blood, or the cold, or the way his hands had shaken afterward. He spoke only of the choice. "He didn't," Ronan said. "He stayed." Briggs lifted his head, eyes soft but alert, as if he understood that this moment belonged to him as much as it did to Ronan. Ronan felt the familiar tightening in his chest, not panic this time, but something closer to grief or gratitude. The two often felt the same. "That's when I learned something," he said. "Dogs don't stay because they don't know how to leave. They stay because they decide you're worth staying for." Marlowe swallowed. "But dogs die." she said quietly. Not accusing, just honest. Ronan nodded. Yes, he said. They do. The words seemed to ripple through the room. One of the younger boys frowned. Another child's foot stopped swinging. Ronan didn't rush past it. That's the part adults sometimes get wrong, he said. We tell kids that loving something means it won't ever hurt. That if it hurts, it means something went wrong. He shook his head once, slowly. Loving a dog is the opposite of that. He shifted slightly, making sure Marlowe could see his face clearly. When you bring a dog into your life, Ronan said, you're planting a small seed of sadness. You don't see it at first. It's buried deep. But it's there. Marlowe's fingers tightened again. But you also plant 1,000 days of warmth, Ronan went on, of not being alone, of being chosen every morning, of having someone who listens to you, even when you don't know how to say what hurts. Briggs leaned into Ronan's hand, eyes closing briefly, as if affirming the memory rather than the words. That sadness, Ronan said softly, doesn't mean the love failed. It means the love worked. The room was completely still now. Even the radiator had fallen silent. Marlowe's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She was listening too carefully for that. So, she said, voice barely above a whisper, when dogs die, they're not leaving us? Ronan shook his head. No, he said, they're finishing the job. Marlowe frowned slightly. What job? Ronan smiled, not with his mouth, but with his eyes. The job of staying as long as they can. He paused, letting the words settle. Dogs don't leave because they stop loving us, Ronan said. They leave when their bodies can't keep up with their hearts anymore. And when that happens, they leave everything they are with you. Marlowe looked down at Briggs. Briggs met her gaze calmly, his expression open, unafraid. There was no urgency in him, no sadness, only presence. Ronan followed her gaze. See him? Ronan said. Right now, he's here. That's what matters. Marlowe nodded slowly. But what about after? She asked. When they're not here anymore? Ronan was quiet for a long moment. This was the part no one had answered for him. Once. When that day comes, he said at last, you'll miss them. A lot. And that hurts. He did not sugarcoat it. But you won't be alone, he continued, because every place they stood with you, every moment they stayed, it changes you. He placed his hand over his chest, just above his heart. They stay here, he said, in the part of you that knows how to stay with others, how to be loyal, how to love without running. Marlowe looked up at him then, really looked. And my parents? She asked. They left too? Ronan felt the question strike something deep and old. He chose his words carefully. Your parents didn't leave because they didn't love you, he said. Sometimes people leave because they can't stay, not because they don't want to, but because something bigger than them takes them away. Marlowe considered this, eyes distant. And dogs? She asked again, quieter now. Ronan smiled faintly. Dogs would stay forever if they could, he said. That's why losing them hurts the way it does. Briggs shifted, lifting one paw briefly and setting it down again, a small, restless motion. Ronan's hand followed instinctively, fingers brushing over the familiar fur. Ronan looked at Marlowe one last time. So no, he said, dogs don't leave us. He paused, then added the words he had carried for years without knowing how to give them away. They walk with us until they can't walk anymore, he said, And even then, they never really go. Marlowe's shoulders eased, just a little. She reached out, not to Ronan, but to Briggs, and rested her hand gently against his neck. The dog remained still, accepting the touch without condition. Moira O'Hara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ronan rose slowly to his feet. Briggs stood with him, their movements seamless, practiced, as if guided by the same quiet rhythm. For a moment, nothing else mattered. The answer had been given, and it stayed. Sometimes, God does not answer us with thunder or fire. Sometimes, He answers with steady hands in moments of fear. Sometimes, He answers through a loyal heart that refuses to walk away. In our everyday lives, we all face moments when logic says it is over, when hope feels exhausted, when the world tells us to stop trying and let go. But perhaps faith is not about certainty. Perhaps faith is choosing to stay one more moment, to love even when we know it will one day hurt, to hold on even when we are afraid of loss. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us about a moment when faith, love, or loyalty carried you through something difficult. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing them together. May God bless you, protect you, and walk beside you in every season of your life. And may He remind you that miracles still happen, often in the quietest ways.